Experts say the U.S. foster care system is failing Black children, and the police shooting of Ma'Khia Bryant is one powerful example. 16-year-old Ma'Khia was shot and killed by a Columbus, Ohio police officer on April 20th during a fight over an unmade bed, while she was under the care of a system that was designed to provide safe, temporary homes for children whose biological parents are unable to care for them. There are allegations of neglect and harmful conditions in Ma'Khia's foster home. According to experts, this is common for tens of thousands of kids in care, especially Black kids. Today, we are asking why. All coming up next.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report.
May is National Foster Care Month. This month gives us an opportunity to celebrate parents fostering kids and those advocates and professionals who represent foster kids. But it also gives us an opportunity to shine a bright light on a system that many say is failing kids. Right now, there are more than 430,000 kids in foster care across the United States. The total number over the last decade has seen a constant increase. The National Coalition of Child Protective Reform reports that children often face neglect, abuse, and other harmful conditions in foster care. Experts say the abuse is particularly hurting Black children who are overrepresented in foster care and who already face implicit bias and police brutality because of the color of their skin. Black kids make up over 23% of the kids in foster care nationally, but only 14% of the total child population in the United States. These children experience intolerable levels of trauma that oftentimes never gets addressed, and also which leads to cycles of dysfunction, more trauma, and in many cases, a pipeline to prison. Where was Child Protective Services for Ma'Khia Bryant? And where are they for thousands of other Black kids? Here for my leadoff panel is Regina Louise. She is an alumni of the foster care system. Regina cycled through over 30 foster care homes and psychiatric facilities before the age of 18. Her story garnered national media attention and is the subject of a Lifetime movie. Today, Regina is a successful author of multiple books, including her latest, which is due out on June 8th, called Permission Granted. She is also an avid foster care advocate who believes the system is so broken that it needs to be abolished. Good morning and welcome to the show, Regina.
Good morning, Areva. Great to be here.
Thank you so much. You have had such an incredible experience with the foster care system, and you've been so public about it. You've shared it, and it's inspired. I know just thousands and thousands of kids across this country obviously garnered national media attention. So I just want to ask you, as a foster care alumni, what was your experience like? So it gives us some perspective about what Black girls in particular are experiencing in foster care.
You know, it's a beautiful question. And the first thing that comes to mind for me is, as a young girl, I was seen as an adult. I was treated as an adult. I couldn't be seen for the child that I was. I couldn't be seen for another, just being a human being who deserved and needed to be met, just on the fact of my common humanity, dignity. So it was easier to see me as an adult, and then to see me with the adultification bias lens. What that did is it exonerated any of the adults in my life for being culpable for taking care of me. So, as you know, according to that study from Georgetown in 2017, Black girls between the ages of 5 and 14 are considered adults. Therefore, it means that they don't get the protection. They're considered more sexually aware and adult-like, and they are perceived less innocent and more likely to be criminalized. So if that is the first thing someone is experiencing when they meet a child who looks like me, right? These unconscious biases come into play. And the next thing you know, I'm no longer a child with a broken heart who is rejected and abused. I am an adult who probably brought it on myself, and the adults in my life did what they needed to do. And now, instead of holding the adults accountable who failed us, we are held responsible for the sins of the mother, the sins of the father.
Regina, I want to ask you about the, more than 30 foster homes and including psychiatric facilities before 18. Now that you're an advocate, how common is your experience? I mean, because when I hear that number, it's such a shocking and startling number, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's more common than everyday people know.
Well, Areva, to be transparent, it was 30 years ago that I was a ward of the court, a child in foster care. And now, 30 years later, it's common to have 30 is sort of like the baseline, right? And then a lot of, especially Black children, Black girls in particular, this is common. Being in level 14 residential treatment centers, they're used to house and to keep children pathologized because there's not enough families to hold our children, to receive our children. So it's easy to escalate their experience as a child suffering from trauma, suffering from horrendous experiences. It's easy to make the child wrong, pathologize the child, criminalize the child, and then say, oh, we need to put this child in a high contact, high level place. Look, this is a $650 billion a year industry. This is built off the backs of Black children. When we talk about this disproportionality, this is real. As you said, 20% of the children in foster care they look like us, while they represent 14% of the general population of children. So this is an epidemic. This is systemic erasure, 100%. And we blame the victim. But in the case of our children, they don't even get to be seen as victims, received as victims, interacted with, intervened as a victim. They're seen as the cause of their own broken heart.
Regina, I got to go back to this number. You said you were in care, obviously, several decades ago, but that 30 number that's often associated with you is the norm.
It's the norm.
Help us understand how it is that someone like you and kids who are experiencing something very similar can go from 30 plus homes, because you're saying that that's the norm. There are kids who are in the 40, 50 range and maybe even up. How do you overcome that trauma of being passed around from house to house, having to adopt to new rules? Every time you go into a new home, I assume it's a new set of rules, a new set of people, new set of circumstances that you have to make adjustments to. How did you, as a kid going through something like that, now you're a teacher, you're an advocate, you're an author, how do a kid overcome that trauma?
Well, that's the $1 million question. And one of the things that I can say about my own experience is I was very connected to the truth of who I am as a young girl. I was very connected to the truth of my spirit. I always knew you may beat the Black off me, you may beat the flesh off me, but you will never, ever, ever get permission to kill my spirit. Let's get real here, okay? Like, I am a sovereign being, and I had that kind of precocious nature as a child. And I have spoken in 28 states, over 6,000 cities, and I'm very clear when I stand in the middle of a stage and I say to all the people who show up for our children, look, this isn't about you. This is about you empowering that child who's in your charge to be 100% precocious, to be 100% all about them, to teach them how to get off their back and on their sides. Because we all know that when you go home at night to your own families, you turn the needs of those children off. You turn the hearts, you turn the cries, the yowls, the loneliness of what's true about those children off. So I would say I've always been connected to what's true about me. Even though I may not have had the language, I had a felt sense of who I am in relationship to what's divine about me, what's spiritual about me, what's true about me. And that was in a realm that so many people could not see. But, even in solitary confinement, I can remember speaking into the light at the bottom of the door, because, in solitary confinement, there are no windows. There are no handles on the doors. There are no toilets. There are no escape. So what I had learned to do is not so different than what Elie Wiesel had to do, right? What Viktor Frankl had to do, right? In the face of the oppressor. What Nelson Mandela had to do. When the outside world subjugates you, when the outside world is hell-bent on erasing you, there's only one place to go, and that is to you. To go in you and to be about you. What did Rabbi Hillel say? If I am not for me, who will be? And I knew that as a child. And I just stayed true to that North Star. I stayed true to the thread of what was happening inside of me, as opposed to the naysayers and the voices and the pathologizing and all of that on the outside. It's like, yeah, I didn't have any mirroring. But I knew that when I looked in the mirror, what I saw is spirit and what was true about me. And go to John 3:16, okay?
Okay. No, I love that. I love that. I love that you were able to go inward and find your strength and your empowerment there. Your story is so inspiring, has become, a Lifetime movie, told your story. And I was reading about it, so inspired by Jean Kerr, this woman who wanted to adopt you as a child but wasn't able to, but who then adopts you at 40. Tell us about that experience, because that was so just inspiring and moving for me. And I just want others to know how you and Jean finally reconnect.
Right. So, like I said, precocious, that was my nature. And, I pursued her. I knew goodness when I saw it, and she was as close as it came to reminding me of the goodness that I felt back home with my people in Texas. They couldn't keep me, but the reality is there were some good moments, right? That, after church on Sundays, the catfish and the banana pudding and all those wonderful things, she became emblematic of that.
And you met her at a treatment facility, right? Is that correct?
Yes, after I had left my family and I was at one of the receiving homes for children. And the first day that I met her, and she said, "Good morning, Pumpkin." And I was like, "I don't know who you calling Pumpkin. You better watch out, white lady." I got all neck twirling on her. "I know you ain't trying to call me out my name." She lowered herself down and she said, "I know your name. Your name is Regina." Girl, and her breath smelled like warm pet milk out of a can, vanilla, brown sugar, and like rice pudding. And I knew then, Areva, love has its own smell, girl. That was a moment of just kindness, indelibly marking me. And that became a barometer, right? So I have high spatial intelligence, as I've come to recognize. And with that comes the ability to live very thoroughly and satisfactorily in my mind in a way where I can see things in a 3D sort of way. So when this woman, for me, indelibly marked me with the scent of her breath, I knew then that all was well. And then I could learn to make that smell my baseline. So anytime anything fluctuated, I was able to always go back to the smell and know that all is well and I too will survive this.
Yeah. So I know that you and Jean ultimately reconnect, and she does adopt you, even though you are an adult at the time. I want to bring into the conversation now Dr. I had it right now. I lost it. Ijeoma Opara. She is an assistant professor of internal medicine and pediatrics at Wayne State University School of Medicine. Good morning, Dr. Opara. I practiced your name and then I came up with these weird ways to write it that I got all confused by it. But I'll call you Dr. Opara. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. You've been listening to Regina tell her story, and I know, you know, this is a month where we celebrate foster moms and professionals that work in the system, but it's also a time where we have to look at and be reflective about the crisis that's happening in this system, particularly around Black kids and the startling reports about abuse and neglect in this system. Help us understand why, after years and years of doing this, why states have not gotten this right, why we are hearing and seeing these startling statistics as it relates to Black kids and how they're treated in foster care.
Thank you, Areva. Thank you for having me on this morning, afternoon. And thank you, Regina, for just you. I was just sitting here and just wallowing in the atmosphere of just your greatness, your awesomeness. Thank you. I'm so inspired just by who you are. It's difficult to go after Regina, okay? It's very mean to call me after her, but I'll take it. Good morning to everyone. So great question, Areva, honestly. Why is it that we haven't gotten this right? Why have we not fixed what we know has been broken for a long time? What we know has negatively impacted our children and disproportionately children of color, Black and brown children. And I think the answer is similar to why we haven't gotten it right in so many different systems, in the healthcare system, in the public health or medical system, in criminal justice, in education, etc. And that is because we still haven't gone down to the root cause, and ask those difficult questions and have difficult conversations around the founding of our country and our nation, and how those systems of injustice and oppression rooted in structural racism and patriarchy and white supremacy and on, and then show up in the different systems that make up our society. And that's why we keep pursuing symptoms as if they were the actual disease. That's why we keep pathologizing symptoms rather than pathologizing the actual pathology. All right. And so Regina spoke about, and you too, Areva, talked about the overrepresentation of our community in these systems. And it's not by accident. We understand that systems operate as they were designed. Right. And so truly, these systems were designed ultimately, right, rooted in the dehumanization of Black bodies, which is why our children are adultified even as little as 5. I have 3 girls, 7, 5, and 2. And I can tell you, these are babies. Okay, these are babies. When what happened to Ma'Khia Bryant happened, I wept. I sat in this very room, I'm right down in my basement office, in this very chair, and I cried like a baby. And I called my friend and we wept on the phone because a mama's heart was broken. And it was not long after Dante Wright was killed. And so it was too much. And that baby called his mama on the phone, right, as he was being killed. So truly, our children being adultified, overrepresented in this system, overrepresented when it comes to the negative outcomes of being in this current child welfare system, whereby they're experiencing negative social, behavioral, and educational outcomes, where they're less likely to be placed in permanent placement, where they're they're more likely to be placed in group placement, which has been associated with negative outcomes, where they're less likely to be adopted, and so on and so forth. These are systems operating as they're designed. So to your question, Areva, to truly then undo these really symptoms, it will require for us to address the root cause systemically, and then have it to show up in the transformation, not even reformation. Regina talks about abolition. It requires an intrinsic reimagination and then transformation of the child welfare system as it currently stands.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, Doctor, about the abolition or the dismantling of the system. I know, Regina, you call or you have often talked about the need to abolish the current foster care system. What does that look like for you? I think we lost your audio, Regina.
No, can you hear me now?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I want to go back to what Dr. Opara said, abolishing the current system that has been built on an ancient historical truth about the invisibility and the permission to eviscerate, to dehumanize, erase the Black body. So first we have to address that. Right? That the mentality, the mental structuring that would allow such a system to exist. And then from that, once we dismantle, deep re-educate, right? Get everybody to sign on and sign in. We start from there. And then we start imagining just the simple thing, the simple, how do I want to say this? The simple considerations you give a white child. Mm-hmm. Let's just start there. Equitable education. To see that their affect is important. Mm-hmm. And then what does it mean to regulate with that? What does it mean to attune? What does it mean to mirror back to another human being? Their dignity, their own humanity, which is worthy of just that, their humanity, without the bells and the whistles and the performances and the Black tax or, the Latin this or the whatever, all of those stereotypical classifications that make it difficult to just be a human, but just one more barrier to keep you from the dignity of what it means to just be.
And Dr. Opara, so I love what you say, Regina, in terms of just starting over without all the biases and the stereotypes. What we do know, Dr. Opara, is that kids in care, particularly again African-American kids, kids of color, are more likely to be diagnosed with developmental delays and attention deficit disorder, anxiety, depression, PTSD, all of these conditions. What is being done in the system to address what is well documented in terms of the psychological impact, the developmental impact on kids in care?
So you said, thank you, Areva, you said a very important word, actually, both you and Regina, which is trauma. And I think that oftentimes trauma shows up in so many varied ways. And some of these symptoms that are then diagnosed as ADD, as you said, or other sort of psychiatric illnesses are simply manifestations of the trauma that our children are experiencing within these systems, and and the violence that they are exposed to as a result of the system, even just as something as basic as the separation from their home setting, right, from their birth families. That violence inside of that can absolutely be a tremendous amount of trauma that then shows up with behavioral adjustment challenges that are really appropriate responses of any human, is what Regina is saying. The humanity, right? We pathologize regular, normal human behaviors when those behaviors occur in Black and brown bodies. But that should those same behaviors occur in white bodies or non-Black and brown bodies or white bodies, there's empathy and compassion and sort of extra consideration provided to understand it. So what is being done? Not much, but what needs to be done? A lot. And it is what Regina is speaking about. All systems, including the medical establishment. We know the field of psychiatry has a lot, right? A lot to do in terms of growing and naming inherent biases, racial biases, and frankly, manifestations or expressions of structural racism, even within the field, medicine in general, and certainly psychiatry, to begin to be very intentional about who are we diagnosing with what diagnoses, and which ones are really appropriate or truly driven by sort of, again, the pathologization of Blackness. Right. And so I think that there is a lot that needs to be done to really begin to name the realities of our children's experiences within these systems, and then begin to create, reimagine, and then create appropriate comprehensive management plans to address those systems. And I'll be remiss if I don't mention this. Not only do we criminalize or pathologize Blackness, we criminalize and pathologize poverty. And poverty and Blackness, there is some intersectionality because poverty is produced by poverty producing policies, right? And there's a lot of overlap in terms of race and class and how that shows up in the America of today. But the truth of the matter is that we don't address those social determinants that then make it difficult for families to sustain each other. So what is that? Employment, income, education, childcare that's affordable, housing. Housing is huge. We know a lot of people experience eviction and, of course, unemployment during this time of the pandemic. There's been a lot of intersectionality with the impact of the pandemic as it relates to children and their health and well-being. And so if we are not a society that, again, going to that root cause, is truly committed to taking care of everyone and making sure that even our least of these at least have 3 squares on the table, food on their back, roof above their head for everyone, and if we don't even provide that, why would we not see the outcomes, again, the symptoms, which we pathologize as disease, right? Why will not see that show up in terms of children and their welfare? So I would say that we have a long way to go, in addressing exactly what Regina is talking about, which is to uproot and dismantle and abolish the vestiges of white supremacy and patriarchy and structural racism as it lies in all our systems which interconnect and intersect, and specifically in the child welfare system, as we're talking about today, right? We also have a lot of work to do in the field of psychiatry and medicine, and how we build coalition and collaborate with child protective services and the child welfare system to provide best practices that are culturally responsible and are really uplifting and focus on the strengths and assets and not deficits of our children and Black families, right? And then we also need to do a lot of work around, again, speaking to how all these come together in very in a way that is collaborative and patient and families first through equitable and just policies.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Opara. Obviously, so much work to be done. I want to thank you too, Regina, for sharing your story. I want to remind everyone you have a new book coming out just on June 8th called Permission Granted. There's a story about your life on Lifetime. There are tons of articles about your struggle and the work that you've done and that you're doing now to be such a incredible advocate for kids in the foster system. I want to thank both of you for just being a voice for the voiceless and standing up for our kids in care. Thank you so much again, Dr. Opara, and thank you, Regina, for joining me this morning. All right, now we're going to talk to a couple of women who are actually working in the system. My next guest is Sharon Lawrence. She is the CEO of CASA, Court-Appointed Special Advocates for Children, and Sandra Gasca-Gonzalez. She's the VP of Systems Innovation at the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and she's working also in the child welfare system. Thank you so much, Sharon and Sandra, for joining me this morning. You all have been listening to Dr. Opara and Regina, and I'm sure you've heard these stories before. The statistics about the overrepresentation of African American kids. What do you think? I'll start with you, Sharon. You're in the courts as a advocate, and you're working with advocates that are in the court every day. Do you think, like Regina said, that it's time to totally think of dismantling the current child welfare system as we know it?
Well, I would agree with Regina that it needs serious reforms. And I think that there are some steps being taken now. There is no question that there's disproportionality of Latinx and Black children in our system. And we haven't really talked about some of the other causes of why that occurs. One of them is that the foster care system is a confidential, closed court system. So there is a lot of myths and fallacies that foster children grow up in great foster families and they go on to live happily ever after. And because we're protecting the families and particularly the children and parents, we don't talk about what goes on in foster care. We don't talk about individual cases. And so it is important for us to shine a light on what's going on and to make some real changes in the way that we look at cases where children might be removed and where they can stay with their families. There are two things that have really helped, I believe, that we need to really expand and study. The first in Nassau County is a process called blind removal, where all of the demographic identifying information by social workers is removed before they decide as a team whether to take a child from its home or not. And that's very important because that will help by doing a blind removal, not knowing where they live or where their family's last name are or what the unique circumstances are. And I think that will help. The second thing is we need to support families that are in crisis. We know that removing children and putting them in foster care is traumatic for them. And we do have some great social workers and some great foster families and some great CASAs, court-appointed special advocates that are volunteers that are in court advocating for specific children to whom they are assigned to help the courts and the professionals make better decisions. But we know that we need to do more around that. So if we can surround families with more services before their children are removed, that is more helpful to the families. Kids want to stay home if they can, but there are going to be some situations where we're not going to be able to help the family and the child is going to need some other permanency. So I do see serious reforms needing, but we're always going to have some safety net for those children and families who need much more than we can give them right now. So we've got to figure that out. I did want to mention that for people who are despondent about the situation, it is pretty overwhelming. And Regina's story is one of thousands. Here in California, we have about 83,000 children in our foster care system over the course of a year. And we have volunteer court-appointed special advocates, people from the community who go through training and become assigned to these children in foster care, a particular case, a child or a sibling group. And they are court officers appointed by the judge to investigate that case and to make recommendations and to work carefully with social workers, caregivers, and attorneys to make sure that these children are getting everything they need. And there's some really wonderful success stories. And I'm so glad Regina had somebody in her life because we do know that one person caring about a child can help erase some of the traumatic injuries that they have suffered.
Yeah, so Sandra, Sharon talks about these two things that are working in the system, one being this blind removal and the second one being more support for the families. Do you think that's going to really address, though, the systemic racism that is so pervasive in the system?
Areva, first of all, thanks for having me on the show and for shedding a light on this very important topic. I want to go actually back to what Dr. Opara said about the foster care system is doing exactly what it was designed to do. And if we even go further upstream from child welfare, we have an army of mandated reporters that by law have to report any suspicion of abuse or neglect. And so these are doctors, these are teachers, these are could be your neighbors. They may not be mandated by law, but everybody is really expected to report based on suspicion. And we just had a great conversation with Regina and Dr. Opara about racialized perceptions. So when you think about this mandated reporting issue, it really does lead to these, what I think are very provocative statistics. We know that about 37% of any child in the United States will have a child protection investigation by the time they're 18. And 53% of those children will be African American. So we have to ask ourselves, in addition to blind removals, when they get the hotline call, that first report is made. What's happening further upstream that needs to change? And on top of that, we know that 80% of the child abuse and neglect reports that do come in are for neglect, and only 20% of those are substantiated for abuse. So African American families, Latino families are getting a hard knock at the door by Child Protection Services based on perceptions, based on need. And I think that we as a society really need to take a look at what we're bringing in terms of our worldviews that really shape that. So I think what Sharon is saying is right, but I think we have to go further upstream.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, and going back to the system, because Dr. Opara did say the system is doing exactly what it was designed to do. I read an article by Dorothy Roberts. She's a professor at Northwestern Law School, and she argues that the foster care system is designed to monitor, regulate, and punish poor families of color. Do you think that's an accurate critique? Sharon, I'll start with you.
Well, Dr. Jessica Price is a social worker out of Florida who really does a great overview of the systemic racism that's in child welfare. And I think anyone who really is aware of what's going on in our system would have to admit that Black and brown children are more targeted, and that there is systemic injustice in the way that we look at families and the way that we try to help them. So I would agree that we need serious reforms, and that it is it just historically and even in the present, I would say that anyone who knows about child welfare would say, yes, we've got to do more to help these families. And yes, there is huge disproportionality in our system, and it's because of the inherent racism that exists.
And Sandra, how do we start to break some of that down? Because what we're really talking about, and you're hitting it on the head when you talk about the reporting. So someone sees a Black family engaged in some kind of activity, and if that activity doesn't fit their white heteronormative view of what families should do, then it's labeled as abuse or neglect, and then that leads to some kind of a call and an investigation by a child welfare agency in a particular state. How do we get folks in this system to recognize that the families of the 1950s, the mother, father, white picket fence, that there's so many more versions of families that exist, and that value system that's placed on that white heteronormative family is not the only way we should be looking at families. How do we start to break that down?
Yeah, I would say the first thing, this is going to oversimplify the answer, but we need to talk with people in community, and we need to listen. And systems, being at the table with families who have experienced the system, they know what they need. They know what led up to that crisis. They know what supports they need in the future. And that all, instead of investing billions of dollars into the child welfare system, how do we figure out how to invest in those solutions that families and young people who have aged out of foster care understand? Much like Regina, she has a lot of great ideas. And how do we start to create a new system based on that? I would say that in terms of youth who are aging out of foster care, I actually think that's the biggest failure of the child welfare system. We remove children due to safety or neglect reasons. We promise them they're going to go home or be with a forever family, and we fail them. And then we say, go out on your own at 18 or 21 and go and survive. And we know that nobody would ever do that to their own child, because developmentally it's not appropriate. So one of the solutions that I do see, and I see the strength and the power and the resilience of the young people, there's a revolution happening with the alumni of foster care. And they are the ones that are saying, we want to change the system, because those who come after us, we don't want them to have the same experience. And that's just one of the examples that I can share of what I'm seeing that will change that.
Yeah, and I'm glad you talk about those kids that are aging out, because Sharon, I saw another just startling statistic. I spent the whole night with my just jaw on the ground looking at all these statistics. And one was that like 25% or more of kids that age out of foster care end up in some kind of, juvenile justice or, the criminal justice system, and that there's a foster care pipeline to prison. Yeah. Help us understand, and maybe that's what Sandra's talking about, we say at 18, bye, you're an adult, make it on your own. I live with young adults who are, 23 and 25 years old, and they'll be listening, but between the three of us, or they can barely function. So, and they've had parenting their whole lives. I'm sorry, kids, of course you're functioning. But my point is that lots of young adults are still living at home and getting support from family. So how is it we expect these 18-year-olds who've not had a supportive family to go out and make it? I guess the statistic makes sense.
Well, you're absolutely right that age 18, a young person, especially one who is not experiences a safe family and has moved from place to place, is probably not going to be able to be successful in the world. And so that's why many states in our country, about half, have extended foster care to the age of 21, including California, which is terrific, but it's still not enough. We know that the brain of these young adults is not really finished developing until they're in their mid-20s. So in California, there was some proposed legislation that we extend foster care to 25 or so, or 26. Part of the problem is that we don't do a good job in the system of giving mental health treatment to these young people. And one of the things that I wanted to go back to was Regina for a second, who moved 30 times. And the reason she probably moved so much was that she wasn't able to deal with the trauma in her life. And so she was acting out. And that often happens with young people in the foster care system, is that they are acting out because we've never treated their trauma. We've never helped them understand that what happened to them was not their fault. And we oftentimes put them in bad situations where they don't get the help they need. Now, sometimes we put them in really great foster homes, but we haven't given the foster parents the support services that they need to understand the trauma. And so these children move and move and move. And it's not unexpected that children would want to find people like them, or they may need, they need money, or they do something with some of their friends and they don't realize the consequences of it. And then they become part of the juvenile justice system, which again, a lot of well-meaning people are trying to help these youth, but we don't do enough in terms of treatment of mental health and really looking at why are these children acting out. And the children in the foster care system and the juvenile justice system, I would argue, are basically the same. It's the juvenile justice system where the children got caught. In the foster care system, it's the parents that were called out for whatever. And so we need to do a better job of helping these kids. And again, one adult believing in them, standing by them, and really understanding their situation and letting the other professionals know can be one solution to eradicating this this foster care to prison pipeline that we've talking about.
And just quickly, Sharon, how can people get information on becoming a CASA if they, want to volunteer, they want to be involved in the lives of a foster child?
Well, I will tell you that we need many more people to help serve as CASA volunteers in California and across the nation. And so there are two places they can go. If they're in California, you can go to the californiacasa.org website. And anywhere in California, we will refer you to the local CASA program in your community where they will train you and support you and let you advocate for the needs of these children, because we need far more of them in California. If you are not in California and you're watching this and you want to help, please go to the National CASAGAL.org website and learn more about how to volunteer in your community. We need mentors, we need foster parents, and we need CASA volunteers to stand up and start making changes so that these children can thrive.
And just last word with you, Sandra. This is National Foster Care Awareness Month, and we are, again, celebrating those professionals and foster parents who are doing a great job. But what do you think should be the second focus of this month? I'm wondering about the Biden administration. We've heard a lot about criminal justice reform. We've heard a lot about climate change. We're talking about infrastructure. I don't know if I've heard a lot yet about foster care reform. Is that something you'd like to see the Biden administration make a higher priority?
Areva, one of the great advantages we have is that we do a lot of work with the federal government. So we know that they are actually making prevention of family separation a priority in this administration. So we're very excited to hear about that. I think that one of the things that I would like to see as it relates to how we categorize children and families, we have to start looking at families holistically and not through their legal statuses. And we need to think about how we bring healing. This is about healing. When you talk to young people, when you talk to families, we in the system have a very pathologized way of defining their issues. So we lean on traditional therapies, we lean on medication, when in fact what they're saying is, let my child express themselves through art, through music, through poetry. Let's find a way to have restorative practices that help the community heal when there have been tensions or conflicts. And that's really what I would hope we would walk away with in this National Foster Care Month, that it's not only about the people in the child welfare system, it's the ecosystem that supports it and the community that can help find those solutions.
Well, thank you so much, Sandra and Sharon, for the work that you both are doing, the organizations that you both are a part of and that you lead. Obviously, lots to talk about. Glad to hear, Sandra, that the Biden administration is prioritizing foster care. I live in the district with Representative Congresswoman Karen Bass. I know she's a huge foster care advocate and has been working on issues of foster care throughout her professional career. So glad to have someone of her stature working on this issue. And again, thanks to both of you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
All right. Now, my next guest is Marline Francois-Madden. She is a licensed clinical social worker. She is also the CEO of Hearts Empowerment Counseling Center, and she has a book out, and the book is called The State of Black Girls. Good morning, Marline, and thanks so much for joining me. I know you've had a chance to listen to Sharon and Sandra and some of my earlier guests. And I want to focus with you on that Ma'Khia Bryant story, because I think, as you heard Dr. Opara say, she wept when she saw Ma'Khia, get shot. We actually had a chance to see it, unfortunately, on national television. We saw that videotape of that Columbus police officer shooting this 16-year-old girl who had been in foster care for several years. I think she had had about 5 placements. There's some disputes, I think, at this point about what kind of care she was receiving in that foster home. I don't want to focus on that case specifically, but I do want to talk about how kids, could end up, how a kid like Ma'Khia could end up in a situation where she felt, endangered. I guess the police are called. She's in a childhood fight, but she ends up dead. How shocking was that to you?
Yes, it was very shocking for me. Also for myself, when I watched it, I did cry. I couldn't sleep that night. I couldn't sleep for a few days. I had trouble sleeping, to be honest, because it was such a close story for me because of the fact that I've worked in child protective services. I've worked with, adolescents that's been placed in therapeutic foster care system to aged out programs. So for me, I recognize how Black girls were more likely to be placed in foster care systems and how they received a lot of racial and gender discriminations, and also just the adultification biases of Black girls. So when you looked at her story, and as tragic as it is, she reached out for help. And this is common where Black girls reach out for help and they often feel invisible. They're not seen or heard, or people don't respond immediately to the call. So you see a large increase of urban policing among Black youth, and you're not seeing the fact that people look at them as small children that needs protection and need to feel supported and safe. And so I've seen this happen, not to that extreme, but I've seen it happen where, Black girls are placed in certain foster homes and they're telling their caseworker, they're telling their, CASA worker, the law guardian that, I don't like where I'm being placed. I don't feel safe here, or I'm being bullied at school. And it's always, you just have to wait till your next court date. You have to stay here. You can't go back home just yet. And so Black girls are not really viewed the same way as white girls that are placed in foster care.
So if Marline, if the research shows that kids fare better when they stay with family, kinship care, why does the system continue to focus on fostering, placing kids outside of their family, environment?
I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that when you have to be placed in a kinship care, there's a lot of work that goes into it with making sure the home has been assessed by a child protective CPS worker, child protective service worker, where they're going in the home, they're doing background checks on everyone that's in the home. There's a lot of paperwork that goes into it. And so if you already have a resource parent, also known as a foster parent, who's available, whose home has been licensed and cleared, then oftentimes you'll find that they'll just place a child in that home. So if you get a call at 11 p.m. on a Friday evening, you're on call as a child protective service worker, and you have to remove that child out of the home, then you're calling the judge to get an immediate removal. And you're going to place them with one of your resource parents that you have, maybe for the weekend, until you decide where that child needs to be placed. But then people aren't getting to that part. And what I find is that also too, a child is not just removed out of the home immediately. They may have been multiple calls previously, but also too, they aren't providing services in the home to support that child in their home environment. So whether it's providing in-home therapy, to having that child assess and providing additional support in school for them if they're struggling with their emotions or their behaviors. So they're not providing that additional support and trying to figure out, okay, what family members do we have that we can build connection with? Because studies do show that when there is kinship care, it's easier for that child with that transition. When they have those home visits or when they have supervised visitations, now you're there with your biological parents, you're there with your caregivers, you're there with the kinship worker, the kinship parent, the parent that you have that's taking care of you at the moment, and they all may know each other. It's easier for that child. But when you're placing a child in a foster care where it's not with a family member, it's not with a relative, and imagine what that transition looks like when they have to have supervised visitation. There may be some tension in the room. This isn't, you aren't my mother, you aren't my father, you're not related to me. I want to stay with my family. And I think that's something else that we don't explore often, is that when children go for these home visitation, whether it's for the weekend, whether they're supervised or unsupervised, child protective service workers also have to prep the resource parents as far as, are there going to be any changes with their behaviors and moods when they return back into your home? Because they're not staying with their biological family overnight, or they're not returning back home and they have to go back with that resource parent. Really helping them with that transition, letting the schools know about that transition too, that where if there's any behaviors that you recognize, for you to not immediately push those children and criminalize them and push them into whether it's a school to prison pipeline, whether it's moving that child from a resource home and putting them in a therapeutic foster care home, or putting them in a residential facility or group home or psychiatric hospital, because this often happens too, where people are placing them to a higher level of care.
We've talked a lot about the adultification. Regina started, the interview earlier in the show talking about being seen as an adult, not being seen as a girl. We know that Georgetown 2017 study is out there about the adultification of Black girls. We saw the mayor in the case of Makia come out and refer to her as a young woman or a young lady. That whole fight that she was involved in, being characterized again as adults fighting, not as kids having, a kid squabble. Yes, she did have a knife, can't, deny that fact, but still the whole situation just reminds us of how often Black girls in particular are characterized in a way that can lead to them being treated as adults, whether it's punishment or, in this case, just regrettably, being shot by police. What do you see that's being done, if anything, to address, the studies out there, the research is out there? We know this issue all too well now, but do you see any changes being made in the foster care system to address what we know to be the case?
To be quite honest, I don't see a lot of changes. I see a lot of talk about, here are the recommendations, what we need to have. We need recommendations with, culturally responsive child protective service workers. We need less school resource officers in the schools. We need, more mental health services for African-American youth. So I see a lot of these recommendations, but what I'm not seeing is policy being changed to address those needs. So we know that 81% of social workers are women and that 58% are white social workers. So we also have to address, what does the racial biases look like of white social workers that are working with Black and Brown children? How do they view them? Do they view them like adult-like figures, or do they see them as children? How are their documentations and notes when they're doing their documentation about youth that are in the foster care system? Are they criminalizing them? Are they writing their notes in a way where it makes that child have less access to certain resources and pushing them into alternative and therapeutic settings and not really giving them a second chance to be home with their family? I also think that we need to have more culturally responsive trainings for mental health professionals and those that are working for Child Protective Services. We know they have annual trainings that they do, but we need more trainings on how do you work with Black girls? What does adultification biases look like? How does trauma look different in Black girls compared to white girls? And also too, we know the CDC put out a report that, the death by suicide rate has been going up for Black youth compared to other racial and ethnic groups. So how does that really impact those that are coming into the foster care system, especially when we know that foster care youth are more likely to have symptoms of ADHD? So how are we addressing their mental health needs? Because that's the part that I think is missing, is the psychological well-being of children that are being placed in foster care settings. They need to be placed with family. So if there is a call that's being called out, Child Protective Services need to start gathering names of those that are family members that the child can stay with, and how can we streamline that process so it's not taking a month or 2 months to find them a place to stay, and now they're being placed in a resource parent home, a foster parent's home that may be 45 miles away from their home, and now their family does not have public transportation or access to go see them. Now that child is displaced from not only their natural environment, they're in a new school environment where they have to learn new people. And so we have to just not only thinking about the environments that they're placed in, but how does that impact their positive youth outcomes?
And you heard Sandra talk about the Biden administration being focused on foster care issues and addressing the crisis in the system. What do you want to see happen? I mean, this is National Foster Care Awareness Month. We're shedding a light on the issues in the system. We're celebrating those folks who are doing good work in the system. Regina says abolish the system. She says, as it currently exists, it is not set up to support African-American kids in particular. From your perspective, having worked inside the system for many years, what do you see the number one change? What would you like to see as the number one change that could really address some of these critical issues we've been talking about?
The number one thing I want to see change is putting Black girls at the table. Give them a seat at the table. They know better than anyone else what they need. So girls like Ma'Khia Bryant, for them to share their lived experiences so they can tell you exactly what's going on. They know the grit of it all, because we're often hearing the perspectives of policy workers, researchers and scholars and psychologists. We're hearing from experts, but the true experts of all of this are the girls that are in the system. So we need to give them a seat at the table. They can tell us how we can better advocate for them, what type of service that they need, how we can truly make things equitable for them, because we keep hearing these talks about equity and social determinants of health, but we don't have young girls at the table. We have too many experts, and someone needs to get their seat up off that table. And we don't have enough experts that are brown and Black people. That's the other thing too. So we need more brown and Black experts that have a seat at the table, but we need to put some Black girls at that table so they can tell us what exactly is it that they need, so we can truly dismantle the system, because right now it's not working. It's not benefiting brown and Black children. They're less likely to get adopted out of the system. They age out of the system, and what ends up happening? Some of them may end up homeless. Some of them may end up in the criminal justice system. So we're really not giving them the life skills to truly succeed, especially in that 18 to 21-year-old age gap, because a lot of just states, you have the option to stay within the system up to 21, or you can leave at 18. Sometimes youth aren't really knowledgeable as far as what is included if they were to stay it up till 21, but really providing them with access. They need access and equity. And I think that's what's truly missing. So if we can give more Black girls a seat at the table, create some sort of policy, a youth advisory board. If Biden can create that, it would make my world. For him to create it, and just get multiple girls from different cities to be at the table.
Well, that's an excellent, excellent idea. And we know government loves commissions. They love, committees. They love convening people to talk about issues. They love listening tours. And I think you're absolutely positively correct. If we're going to solve this problem, we've got to talk to the people who are involved in the system. And I love what you say about giving these Black girls who are being penalized in this system, being punished in this system, giving them a seat at the table. And absolutely, we need more Black and brown folks who are setting these policies, who have the lived experiences from these communities that can really speak to what it's like to live in these communities and to be displaced from your home. Thank you so much for sitting down with me, Marline. Again, your book is State of Black Girls. Make sure you check it out. Some wonderful tips in there for girls in terms of how they navigate the world and overcome obstacles. I love what you're doing. Such an inspirational read. Again, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks to all of my guests. It is National Foster Care Month, and we are shedding light on some of these really big issues. I'm starting to feel like every time I do a show, we're talking about systemic racism. Well, we kind of are because, it's kind of a big issue. And I'm sorry, I didn't create it, but this is a place where we're going to talk about it because we can't fix it if we don't acknowledge it. And unfortunately, from our healthcare system to our criminal justice system and now even our foster care system, a system that was supposed to be designed to keep kids safe. Not surprising, the statistics are horrible. Black kids are at the bottom. Black kids are being underserved, even though they are overrepresented in this system. We see Black kids are being termed out of the system and ending up in the criminal justice system all too often. And this month, hopefully, we are talking about it and shedding the light on it. And Marline just had an excellent idea for the Biden administration, which is to bring those girls to the table. And guys, don't leave out the guys, but bring girls and guys who are part of this system to the table. Give them a seat. Give them a voice. Not an easy job to do, but again, something that we are committed to at the Special Report and doing our part. I want to give you some words to live by before I get out. Life doesn't come with a manual. It comes with a mother, and sometimes that mother is a foster mother. Those are the famous words of someone, and I thought they were worth repeating today. We've had decades of state and federal policy changes that have failed, quite frankly, to transform our foster care system into the safe, supportive, short-term resource that some vulnerable children need. You've heard the experts tell you that over and over again this morning. The most recent federal legislation is the 2018 Family First Prevention Services Act. It is a step towards healing vulnerable families. This law aims to help states improve services to family and provide more support for relatives and families who are caring for children unable to remain safely at home. However, this law does not include any measures aimed at reducing family poverty or systemic racism. It also lacks provisions to remedy the disproportionate number of Black children that are languishing in foster care. And it doesn't address the chronic shortage of Black and brown social workers. Clearly, it is well past time for a major overhaul of the system. Call it dismantle, call it reimagine, but whatever it is, we've got to address poverty and racism in the foster care system. We've got to stop labeling the symptoms of family poverty as child neglect. And likewise, we've got to rid this system of this heteronormative view of what families look like and respect that BIPOC families may look different, and that different is not bad. Now, this will take intentional, uncomfortable, really hard to undo. This is going to be really hard to undo the systemic racism and confront the many cracks in the foster care system. But let's be bold enough to try. Let's step up to the plate and say we are going to take some action. Let's use this month to push for a system that honors the values, traditions, and norms of Black families, of Black parents, of Black children, in the same way that the system values those of white families and white children. And let's make sure that all kids have a mother and a father. No manuals, just lots of love and support. I'm out, y'all. Be safe out there. Don't forget, we are all in this together.